I knew something was wrong the moment I smelled it on that humid June morning in 2025, walking down to my favorite fishing spot along Cedar Creek behind my property in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The stench hit me first, a foul combination of sewage and chemicals that made my stomach turn. I had lived on this 3-acre lot for 15 years, ever since my divorce settlement gave me enough to buy something with real privacy. The creek had always run clear, burbling over smooth stones, home to crawfish and the occasional bass. Now, as I pushed through the honeysuckle bushes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A brand new white PVC pipe, maybe 6 inches in diameter, protruded from the steep bank on the opposite side of the creek. Dark, murky water gushed from it in a steady stream, creating a foul-smelling plume that spread downstream. The once clear water had turned a sickly brown-gray color, and dead minnows floated belly up near the outfall. "What the hell?" I said aloud, pulling out my phone to take pictures. My hands shook with anger as I documented everything from multiple angles. The pipe was new, professionally installed with concrete anchoring. This was not some accidental leak or overflow. Someone had deliberately run a sewer line directly into the creek. I knew exactly who was responsible. The Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association had been developing the land across the creek for the past 2 years, clear-cutting the forest to build their cookie-cutter subdivision of overpriced McMansions. I had watched the destruction from my back deck with growing dismay, but my property line ended at the creek, and there was nothing I could do about what happened on the other side. Until now. I scrambled up the opposite bank, my boots slipping on the muddy slope. The pipe emerged from underground about 20 feet back from the creek, running through what would eventually be someone's manicured backyard. Construction equipment sat idle nearby, and I could see the skeletal frames of houses in various stages of completion. A sign near the road proclaimed, "Pinewood Grove, luxury living at its finest," with a rendering of happy families in front of massive homes. My phone rang as I was taking more photos. It was my neighbor downstream, Roger Harrison. "Greg, you seeing what's coming down the creek?" Roger's voice was tight with anger. "My dogs won't even go near the water. What the hell's going on?" "New sewer outfall," I said grimly. "The HOA development across from my place. They're dumping straight into Cedar Creek." "That's illegal as hell. You call anyone yet?" "About to. I'm documenting everything first." "Good man. I'm taking pictures too. This is going to affect everyone downstream all the way to Morgan Creek." I spent the next 3 hours on the phone. First, I called the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I reached someone in the Water Resources Division who actually seemed to care. "You said the discharge is ongoing right now?" The inspector, whose name was Patricia Gomez, sounded alarmed. "Pouring out like a faucet," I confirmed. "I can send you photos." "Please do. What's the address of the development?" I gave her all the information I had, including the name of the HOA and the development company, Riverside Estates LLC. Patricia told me she would send an inspector out within 24 hours and to avoid contact with the water. Next, I called the Orange County Health Department, then the Environmental Protection Agency Regional Office. Each agency promised to investigate, but I had lived in North Carolina long enough to know that government wheels turned slowly. I needed to apply more pressure. I called my attorney, Marcus Webb, who had handled my divorce and a previous property dispute with a different neighbor over a fence line. "Greg Ashford, it has been a while," Marcus said cheerfully. "What kind of trouble are you in now?" "Not me. The Pinewood Grove HOA. They are dumping raw sewage into Cedar Creek." The cheerfulness evaporated from Marcus's voice. "Raw sewage? Are you certain?" "I am looking at the pipe right now. It is a professional installation, not an accident. Email me everything you have, photos, videos, timeline. I will start drafting a cease and desist letter immediately. This is a clear violation of the Clean Water Act, state water quality standards, and probably a dozen other regulations." "What are we looking at in terms of penalties?" "For the HOA? If the state proves willful violation, we are talking tens of thousands of dollars per day in fines. The EPA can pile on additional penalties, and you, as a downstream property owner, have standing to file a civil lawsuit for damages and injunctive relief." "Good," I said, "because I want them buried." That evening, I walked the creek again with my camera, documenting the extent of the contamination. The foul discharge had created a visible brown stain that extended nearly a quarter-mile downstream before dissipating. Foam collected in eddies along the bank, and the smell was overpowering. This was not just gray water from sinks and showers. This was sewage, probably from the construction workers' portable toilets or some temporary housing unit for the site managers. My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia Gomez at the DEQ. She confirmed an inspector would arrive at 8 the next morning and asked if I could meet them at my property to show them the Outfall location. I replied immediately that I would be there. Sleep did not come easily that night. I kept thinking about the creek, about the ecosystem being poisoned, about every property owner downstream whose land was being contaminated. The HOA had cut corners to save money, I was certain of that. Proper sewer hookup would have required running lines nearly a mile to connect with the municipal system or installing an expensive treatment facility. Instead, they had simply run a pipe to the nearest waterway and hoped no one would notice. They had made a very expensive mistake. Patricia Gomez arrived at 7:45 the next morning, accompanied by a younger man she introduced as Kevin Park, a field inspector. Both wore DEQ polo shirts and carried serious-looking equipment cases. "Show us what you found," Patricia said without preamble. I led them down to the creek. The discharge continued unabated, perhaps even stronger than yesterday. Patricia's face hardened as she saw it. "Kevin, full sampling protocol. I want water quality tests upstream and downstream, flow rate measurements, and chemical analysis. Get photographs of the outfall from every angle." Kevin got to work while Patricia pulled out a tablet and began making notes. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I walked her through the timeline, showed her my photos from the previous day, explained the construction schedule of the development. She asked detailed questions about when I had first noticed any changes in the creek, whether I had seen any workers near the outfall, who owned the development. "The HOA is called Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association," I said, "but the developer is Riverside Estates LLC. I'm not sure who actually authorized this installation." "We will find out," Patricia said grimly. "Kevin, what's the flow rate looking like?" Kevin, who was crouched by the outfall with some kind of measuring device, called back, "Approximately 40 gallons per minute, consistent rate. Temperature is elevated, reading 78 degrees versus 62 degrees for the ambient creek water." Patricia shook her head. "That is significant volume. This is not a minor leak. Mr. Ashford, do you know if they have any permits for water discharge?" "I seriously doubt it. This creek feeds into Morgan Creek, which is part of the Jordan Lake watershed. That is a protected drinking water source." Patricia's expression became even more severe. "You are correct, which makes this exponentially worse. Unauthorized discharge into a drinking water watershed carries maximum penalties." She made several more notes, then looked up at me. "I'm going to level with you, Mr. Ashford. This is one of the most blatant violations I have seen in 15 years with the department. Someone is going to face serious consequences." "Good," I said simply. Kevin spent another hour collecting samples while Patricia photographed everything and made measurements. When they finally packed up their equipment, Patricia handed me her business card. "I will have preliminary lab results within 48 hours, full analysis within a week. Based on what I have seen today, I will be issuing a notice of violation to both the HOA and the development company this afternoon. They will have 24 hours to cease the discharge and submit a remediation plan." "And if they do not?" "Then the state will obtain an emergency injunction and the fines will start immediately. For a discharge of this magnitude into a protected watershed, we are looking at $50,000 per day minimum." I whistled. That will get their attention. "It better. I will be coordinating with the EPA regional office as well. They may want to pursue separate federal charges." Patricia paused, studying the outfall one more time. "Who builds something like this and thinks they will get away with it?" "Greedy people who think rules do not apply to them," I said. After Patricia and Kevin left, I called Marcus with an update. He sounded pleased. "The DEQ notice of violation will strengthen our civil case significantly. I'm going to file for a temporary restraining order in state court today, demanding immediate cessation of the discharge. We will also file a formal complaint under the Clean Water Act citizen suit provision." "How long will all that take?" The TRO hearing will probably be within a week. The broader case could take months, but with ongoing violations and state enforcement action, I think we can force a quick settlement. I do not want a settlement, I said. I want that pipe removed, and I want them to pay for every day of contamination. Then that is what we will fight for, Marcus said. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and emails. Roger Harrison called to say he had also contacted the DEQ and documented contamination at his property. 2 other neighbors from further downstream reached out after seeing the pollution. Everyone was furious. At 4:30 that afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered to find a woman's voice, high-pitched and immediately aggressive. "Is this Greg Ashford?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Linda Patterson. I am the president of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association, and I just received a very disturbing notice from some state agency making ridiculous accusations about our development." I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. "You mean the notice about your illegal sewer discharge into Cedar Creek?" "There is nothing illegal about our drainage system. We have every right to manage water on our property." "Cedar Creek is not your property, Ms. Patterson, and you are not managing water. You are dumping raw sewage into a protected drinking water watershed." Her voice rose to a near shriek. "That is not sewage. That is just runoff from the construction site, rainwater and a little mud. You're making a big fuss over nothing." "Ms. Patterson, I have seen the outfall. I have smelled it. State inspectors have taken samples. That is sewage, and you know it. We have done everything by the book. Our engineers assured us that this temporary drainage solution was perfectly acceptable until the main sewer connection is completed. Then your engineers were wrong, and you are going to face the consequences. The state is demanding you cease the discharge immediately." "This is harassment. We are bringing jobs and tax revenue to this county. You are just some bitter old man who does not want progress in his backyard." I laughed, actually laughed. "Progress? You installed a sewer outfall into a creek that provides drinking water for thousands of people. You have contaminated my property and every property downstream. The DEQ is going to fine you $50,000 per day until you fix this, and I am filing a lawsuit for damages." "You cannot do that. I will call my lawyer. We will sue you for frivolous litigation and harassment." "Go ahead," I said. "Bring your lawyer to court and explain to a judge why you think dumping sewage into a drinking water source is acceptable. I am sure that will go well for you." Linda Patterson made a strangled sound of rage and hung up. I smiled grimly. That had been even more satisfying than I expected. The next morning, I walked down to check on the creek and found the discharge had actually increased. The HOA was not complying with the DEQ notice. The water flowing from the pipe was darker, chunkier, clearly containing solid waste now. My anger flared white-hot. I called Patricia Gomez immediately. "The discharge has gotten worse," I reported. "They are not complying with your notice." "I know," Patricia said, sounding tired. "We got a response from their attorney late yesterday claiming the outfall is permitted under some obscure grandfather clause that does not actually apply. We are filing for emergency injunction in state court this morning." "How long until they actually have to stop?" "If the judge grants the injunction today, they will have to cease immediately or face contempt charges. But Mr. Ashford, you should know that the lab results came back on our initial samples. And fecal coliform bacteria levels are 8,000 times higher than safe standards. E. coli, giardia, and trace amounts of chemical cleaning agents. This is absolutely raw sewage, no question. The analysis also shows elevated levels of nitrogen and phosphorus consistent with human waste. Can you send me a copy of those results?" "I will email them within the hour. Mr. Ashford, do not go near that water. The contamination levels are dangerous to human health." After hanging up, I stood on my back deck, staring at the creek I had loved for 15 years. The HOA had turned it into an open sewer, and they were still fighting instead of fixing it. My hatred for Linda Patterson and everyone involved in this decision deepened. Marcus called an hour later. "I just got off the phone with the HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Grossman. He is claiming this is all a misunderstanding and his clients are willing to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" "Either they stop dumping sewage in my creek or they do not." He is proposing they will cease the discharge within 30 days if we drop all legal action and agree not to pursue damages. 30 days? Absolutely not. That pipe needs to be shut down today. That was my response as well. I told him we are proceeding with the restraining order and the full lawsuit. He threatened to file a countersuit claiming you are damaging the development's reputation with false accusations. Let him try. We have state inspectors and lab results proving everything. Exactly what I said. Greg, I think they are panicking. They probably did not budget for proper sewer installation, and now they are trying to delay until they can figure out funding. But the daily fines are going to bury them. That afternoon, Judge Ellen Martinez granted the state's emergency injunction. The order was clear. Pinewood Grove HOA and Riverside Estates LLC had 24 hours to completely cease all discharge into Cedar Creek or face contempt of court charges and escalating fines starting at $50,000 per day. I received a courtesy copy of the order from Patricia Gomez with a note, "Let's see if they are smarter than they seem." They were not. 24 hours later, the discharge continued. I documented it with time-stamped photos and videos, then sent everything to Patricia, Marcus, and the court. The fines began on June 10, 2025, $50,000 per day. Linda Patterson called me that evening, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "This is your fault! You have destroyed everything we worked for!" "I did not install an illegal sewer line," I said calmly. "You did that yourself. We are going to fight this. Judge Martinez is biased. We will appeal to a higher court. You do that. Meanwhile, the fines will keep adding up. $50,000 today, another $50,000 tomorrow. How long can your HOA afford that, Ms. Patterson? You are a spiteful, horrible man. And you are a criminal who poisoned a public waterway. I know which one of us is going to sleep better tonight." She hung up on me again. Over the next week, the situation escalated rapidly. The EPA got involved, sending their own inspectors and issuing a separate notice of violation with additional federal fines of $25,000 per day. The Orange County District Attorney opened an investigation into potential criminal charges for environmental violations. The story hit the local news. I gave an interview to WRAL, the Raleigh NBC affiliate, standing on my back deck with the fouled creek visible behind me. This HOA deliberately installed a sewer line into a creek that feeds our drinking water supply, I told the reporter, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Collins. They have been ordered by a judge to stop, and they are refusing to comply. Every day they delay, they are poisoning the environment and putting public health at risk. The interview aired that evening. My phone exploded with calls from other neighbors, environmental groups, and news outlets. The story went viral on local social media. People were outraged. Linda Patterson apparently saw the news coverage. She called me at 9 that night, her voice now containing an edge of desperation beneath the anger. "You are ruining us. Do you understand that? The HOA is facing bankruptcy because of your vendetta." "Then stop the discharge," I said. "Cap the pipe, pump the sewage to a proper facility. You have options." "Those options cost money we do not have. The development is already over budget. If we have to pay these fines and install proper infrastructure, we will go under." "That's not my problem. You should have built it correctly from the start." "We need time. Just give us 60 days to work out financing and we will fix everything." "Not a chance. Every day that pipe flows, my property is being damaged. Every day you are breaking the law. You stop today, or the fines keep piling up until you are bankrupt. Your choice." "I hate you," she whispered. "The feeling is mutual, Ms. Patterson." June became July. The discharge continued. The fines accumulated. $50,000 per day from the state, $25,000 per day from the federal EPA, $75,000 every 24 hours. By July 4th, the HOA owed nearly $2 million in fines. I celebrated Independence Day on my back deck with Roger Harrison and a few other neighbors, grilling burgers and watching the sunset. The creek still ran brown, still smelled like sewage, but we knew the end was coming. No HOA could sustain those kinds of fines indefinitely. "They have to cave soon," Roger said, sipping his beer. "The math does not work any other way." "Unless they declare bankruptcy and walk away," I said. "Can they do that?" "Maybe. But then the state can place liens on the property, go after the individual board members, pursue the development company. Marcus says there are a lot of ways to make sure someone pays. Good, Roger said. They should not be able to just escape responsibility. On July 8th, something finally changed. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Walking down to the creek, I saw a crew of workers on the opposite bank, excavating around the outfall pipe. A supervisor in a hard hat was yelling instructions. 2 DEQ inspectors stood nearby, monitoring the work. The discharge had stopped. I called Patricia Gomez. "They are digging up the pipe. Is this official?" "Yes," she said, sounding relieved. "The HOA board voted last night to comply with the court order. They are capping the pipe at the source and installing a temporary pumping system to haul the waste to the municipal treatment facility until they can run proper sewer lines." "What about the fines?" "Still owed in full. We are not waiving a dollar. They have accumulated $2.1 million in state fines as of this morning. The EPA is billing them separately for another $1,050,000. $3.15 million total," I said, doing the quick math. "Plus they have to pay for complete remediation of the creek, testing, cleanup if needed, restoration of the ecosystem. That is probably another $100,000 minimum." "And my lawsuit?" "That is between you and them, but I imagine they will want to settle before this gets any worse." The work continued for 3 days. They cut the pipe, removed the entire installation, filled in the excavation, and restored the bank. A team of environmental contractors took water samples up and down the creek, documenting the extent of contamination and tracking the recovery. Marcus filed an amended complaint, adding the latest damage claims and demanding compensation for loss of property use, environmental degradation, emotional distress, and punitive damages. He was asking for $500,000. "They will never pay that," I said. "Then we will see them in court," Marcus replied. "But my guess is they will negotiate. They are bleeding money from the state and federal fines. They cannot afford a prolonged civil trial on top of everything else." He was right. On July 15th, Richard Grossman called Marcus with a settlement offer. The HOA would pay me $150,000 in exchange for dropping the lawsuit. "Counter at $350," I told Marcus. "You sure? $150 is not a bad settlement." "They poisoned my creek for a month. They fought every step of the way instead of doing the right thing immediately. They made this as difficult as possible." "I want them to feel it," Marcus countered. "We spent 2 weeks negotiating, with offers and counteroffers flying back and forth. The HOA tried to play hardball, but their position was weak and getting weaker. Every financial disclosure showed them drowning in debt from the state and federal fines, unable to continue development, facing potential criminal charges. Finally, on July 30th, we reached an agreement. The HOA would pay me $275,000, issue a formal written apology acknowledging their wrongdoing, and implement a comprehensive environmental monitoring program for the creek for the next 5 years at their expense. I accepted. The check arrived on August 5th. I deposited it the same day, then called my accountant to discuss tax implications and investment options. But the HOA's problems were far from over. The state and federal fines still had to be paid. The Orange County DA had completed his investigation and was pursuing criminal charges against 3 members of the HOA board, including Linda Patterson, for willful violation of environmental protection laws. I attended the arraignment on August 20th, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as Linda Patterson, Treasurer David Morrison, and board member Sandra Hayes were formally charged with 3 counts each of environmental crimes. They all pleaded not guilty. Linda saw me as she left the courtroom. Our eyes met for a long moment. She looked 10 years older than when I had first spoken to her face drawn and haggard. I did not smile or gloat. I just held her gaze until she looked away. The trial was set for November. Meanwhile, the creek was recovering. By late August, the water was running clear again. The foul smell was gone. I saw minnows and crawfish returning, the ecosystem slowly healing from the assault it had endured. Roger and I went fishing one Saturday morning in early September, standing on the bank where the outfall had been. The area was restored, grass planted, no sign remaining of the pipe that had caused so much damage. "Looks good," Roger said, casting his line into a deep pool. "It does," I agreed. Still going to take time for full recovery, but at least it's headed in the right direction. You hear about the HOA? What about them? They are dissolving, cannot pay the fines, cannot continue development, cannot do anything. The whole project is being auctioned off to pay creditors. Good, I said simply. You think they will actually go to jail, Patterson and the others? I hope so, but even if they do not, they are ruined financially and their reputations are destroyed. That is something. The trial began on November the 3rd, 2025. I attended every day, watching as prosecutors laid out the case against Linda Patterson, David Morrison, and Sandra Hayes. The evidence was overwhelming. Engineers testified that the defendants had been explicitly warned that the discharge was illegal. Email chains showed Linda Patterson dismissing environmental concerns as tree hugger nonsense and instructing the contractor to proceed with the installation anyway. Financial records proved they had chosen the illegal option to save approximately $300,000 in proper sewer connection costs. The defense tried to argue that they had relied on professional advice that the discharge was permitted, but the prosecution demolished that claim with testimony from the very engineers who had warned them against it. On November 12th, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts for all three defendants. I sat in the courtroom as Judge Howard Chen read the verdicts aloud. Linda Patterson began crying. David Morrison stared at the table. Sandra Hayes looked shocked, as if she could not believe this was actually happening. Sentencing was set for December 15th. I went home that evening feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice, slow and frustrating as the process had been, was finally being served. The creek burbled peacefully behind my house, clean and clear under the stars. I stood on my back deck for a long time, listening to the water, remembering how it had looked fouled and poisoned back in June. Never again. On December 15th, I returned to the courtroom for sentencing. Judge Chen was thorough and clearly angry. The defendants chose profit over public health and environmental protection, he said, looking down at Linda Patterson, David Morrison, and Sandra Hayes from the bench. They were warned repeatedly that their actions were illegal, dangerous, and harmful. They proceeded anyway, showing callous disregard for the law and the community they claimed to serve. He sentenced Linda Patterson to 18 months in federal prison and 5 years probation, plus a personal fine of $50,000. David Morrison received 15 months and 5 years probation with a $40,000 fine. Sandra Hayes, who had been less directly involved in the decision, got 12 months and 5 years probation with a $30,000 fine. All three were also ordered to pay restitution to the state for environmental damage costs. Linda Patterson sobbed as the sentence was read. She would be reporting to a minimum security facility in February 2026 to begin serving her time. I felt no pity. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me asking for a comment. I kept it brief. This case shows that no one is above the law, I said. Not individuals, not corporations, not homeowner associations. When you deliberately pollute our water and endanger public health, there are consequences. I hope this sends a message to anyone else who thinks they can cut corners on environmental protection. The interview aired on the evening news. I got calls from environmental groups thanking me for standing up against the HOA. A state legislator reached out to discuss strengthening environmental enforcement laws. Christmas came and went. The creek froze over during a cold snap in January, then thawed as temperatures warmed. Life went on. In February, I received a letter from the court-appointed trustee managing the liquidation of Pinewood Grove HOA assets. The auction of the development property had concluded. After paying state and federal fines, environmental remediation costs, legal fees, and creditor claims, there was nothing left. The HOA was officially dissolved, the development abandoned. A different company eventually bought the property at a steep discount, promising to complete the homes with proper infrastructure and environmental controls. I watched warily, but so far they seem to be doing everything by the book. Roger and I went fishing on a warm Saturday in March 2026. The creek was alive with activity, fish jumping, birds calling, the ecosystem fully recovered from the pollution that had nearly destroyed it. You ever think about what would have happened if you had not noticed the pipe that first day? Roger asked, reeling in his line. It would have kept flowing, I said. The contamination would have gotten worse, more properties damaged, more people exposed to dangerous bacteria. Eventually someone would have noticed, but who knows how long it would have taken. They probably thought they could get away with it. Small creek, rural area, who pays attention? I was paying attention, I said, and I was not about to let them destroy something I love without a fight. You did more than fight. You crushed them. They crushed themselves. I just made sure they faced the consequences. We fished for another hour, catching and releasing several nice bass. The afternoon was perfect, the weather warm but not hot, a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. As we packed up our gear, Roger paused and looked at me. You have any regrets? I mean, you did essentially destroy an entire development and send 3 people to prison. I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I feel bad that Linda Patterson was sitting in a federal facility? That David Morrison and Sandra Hayes had lost everything? That dozens of planned homes would never be built as originally envisioned? No, I said finally. They made their choices. They knew what they were doing was wrong, and they did it anyway because they thought they could save money and avoid accountability. The only thing I regret is that it took so long to stop them. Roger nodded. Fair enough. We walked back to our cars, the sound of Cedar Creek following us through the woods. Clean, clear, healthy water flowing as it had for thousands of years and would hopefully flow for thousands more. I drove home, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 9 months. The discovery, the investigation, the legal battles, the trial, the convictions. It had consumed my life for much of that time, but it had been worth it. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The creek sang its eternal song below, and somewhere downstream, Roger was probably doing the same thing on his own deck. My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia Gomez at the DEQ. The subject line read, Final Creek Monitoring Report. I opened it and read through the technical details. Bottom line, Cedar Creek had fully recovered from the contamination event. Water quality met all state and federal standards. Aquatic life populations were healthy and increasing. The monitoring program would continue for the remaining years as agreed in the settlement, but the immediate crisis was over. I replied with a simple, Thank you for everything, and hit send. The sun dipped below the horizon, darkness spreading across the sky. Stars began to appear, bright points of light in the gathering night. An owl hooted from the woods, hunting. I thought about Linda Patterson in prison, about the dissolved HOA, about the millions of dollars in fines and legal costs. I thought about the creek flowing clean and healthy below my deck. Sometimes standing up for what is right means fighting battles that seem too big, too expensive, too difficult. Sometimes it means facing down people with money and lawyers and political connections who think they can bully their way past the rules that govern everyone else. But sometimes, if you are willing to document everything, make the calls, hire the lawyers, and refuse to back down, you can win. You can hold the powerful accountable. You can protect something valuable and make sure that those who tried to destroy it pay the price. I finished my bourbon and went inside, leaving the sounds of the creek and the night behind. Tomorrow I would wake up and the water would still be flowing clean. The HOA would still be destroyed. The criminals would still be in prison. Justice, in the end, had been served. The story might have ended there, but life has a way of adding epilogues. In April 2026, I received an unexpected visitor. A man in his early 30s knocked on my door one Saturday morning, introducing himself as Gary Anderson. I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Ashford, he said nervously. I know you have been through a lot with the previous development company, but I work for Riverside Properties, the new company that bought the Pinewood Grove land. I wanted to introduce myself and assure you that we are doing everything completely legally. I studied him for a moment. He seemed genuine, if anxious. Come in, I said. Want some coffee? We sat at my kitchen table, and Gary laid out detailed plans for the development, proper sewer lines connecting to the municipal system, extensive erosion controls, environmental buffer zones along the creek, regular water quality testing. We want to be good neighbors, Gary said. What happened before was a disaster, and we are committed to making sure nothing like that ever happens again. Why tell me this? I asked. You own the land. You can do what you want as long as it is legal. Because you were right to fight them, Gary said simply. What they did was criminal, and you held them accountable. I respect that, and I want you to know that we are different. We talked for another hour. Gary showed me permits, engineering reports, environmental impact assessments. Everything looked legitimate. Okay, I said finally. I will be watching, but if you do what you are showing me here, we will not have problems. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. That is all I ask. Gary became a regular presence over the following months as construction resumed on the development. True to his word, everything was done by the book. The sewer lines ran where they were supposed to. Buffer zones were protected. Water quality testing showed no contamination. In June, exactly 1 year after I had first discovered the illegal outfall, Gary invited me to a small ceremony dedicating a green space along the creek as Cedar Creek Conservation Area. Informational signs explained the ecology of the creek and the importance of protecting water quality. We wanted to make sure people remember what happened here, Gary said as we stood by the largest sign. Not to shame anyone, but to educate. So the next generation understands why environmental protection matters. I shook his hand, surprised by the gesture, but appreciating it nonetheless. Life settled into a new normal. The development was completed over the next year with no environmental incidents. Families moved into the homes. I occasionally saw kids playing in the yards, couples walking dogs along the trails that had been built through the common areas. Linda Patterson was released from prison in July 2027 after serving 16 months of her sentence. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to another state, trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal and shame. David Morrison declared personal bankruptcy and took a job managing a hardware store. Sandra Hayes moved in with family in Virginia, her reputation too damaged to find work in her previous field. The state and federal governments collected most of the fines through asset seizures and payment plans. The environmental remediation was complete. The creek was healthy and protected. I continued fishing there, walking the banks, watching the seasons change. Roger and I made it a tradition to fish together on the anniversary of discovering the outfall, a reminder of what we had fought for and won. On one such fishing trip in June 2028, 3 years after it all began, Roger landed a beautiful largemouth bass, easily 3 pounds. "Creek is better than ever," he said, admiring the fish before releasing it back into the water. "It is," I agreed, watching the bass swim away into the clear depths. You ever wonder if it was all worth it, all the stress and fighting and time? I looked at the creek, at the healthy ecosystem thriving around us, at the protected green space that would preserve this place for future generations. I thought about the precedent set by the criminal convictions, the message sent to anyone else who might consider taking illegal shortcuts. Every single day, I said, and every single day the answer is yes. We fished until the sun began to set, then packed up our gear and headed home. The creek flowed on behind us, a testament to the fact that sometimes one person, armed with nothing but evidence, determination, and a refusal to accept wrongdoing, can make a real difference. The sewer outfall was gone, ripped out and consigned to history. The HOA that had installed it was destroyed, its leaders imprisoned and financially ruined. The creek was saved. Justice had been served. Consequences had been paid, and the world was a little bit better because someone had been willing to fight for what was right. I went home that evening with a sense of deep peace, knowing that when future families visited Cedar Creek, they would find clean water, healthy fish, and protected natural beauty, never knowing how close it had come to being destroyed by greed and arrogance. And that, in the end, was the whole point, was the